like the intro. Hey, all right, guys. Hey, we're going to talk about the most decisive battle of World War One. It's the first battle of the Marne. I think most people have heard of the Marne, right? The Battle of
Yes.
the Marne.
Yeah.
Technically, we call it the first Battle of the Marne because there was other battles of the Marne, but usually just people say the Battle of the Marne. Now, even though the battle happened on 5 to 9 September of 1914, well, I got to set the stage for the first months of World War One, and it really leads everything up to the battle. So let me kind of set the stage here. After the Franco-Prussian War in 1870, there was a lot of geopolitical things going on in Europe. It's even hard to imagine today how distrustful the European states were, the great powers were in Europe at the time. After Germany kicked France's butt, surrounded Paris, forced a French surrender, seized the territories of Alsace and Lorraine, which you've heard of because of this over the ensuing century. That taught everyone a lesson, and that taught the lessons of the Industrial Revolution. We had factories now mass producing arms. We had increased accuracy on rifled weapons. We had machine guns. We had much more accurate and heavy artillery. All these things we had railroads. One of the lessons of the American Civil War, we had railroads that could rapidly move troops to battlefields far beyond, their communities. And we had urbanization. So we had lots of young men available for reservists to plus up our forces quickly. So the lessons that came out of the Franco-Prussian War were we have to build combat power really, really fast, move it by railroad to the front, and undertake offensive action quickly to force a decisive victory and end the war in short order. That was the lessons of the Franco-Prussian War. Interestingly enough, now with all the things happening between 1871 at the end of the Franco-Prussian War and 1914, the beginning of World War One, you have the rise of Germany, you have the unification of Germany. So now the balance of power in Europe is really tilting towards German strength. You have the Russian Empire, you have the French, you have the British, you have the Italians, you have all these alliances. There's still this imperialist mindset going on. People don't want to miss out on the end of imperialism. They want overseas possessions and raw materials, et cetera, et cetera. You have all these things happening. Oh, and by the way, you have the slow decline and fall of the Ottoman Empire is happening too. So you've got all these forces at work in Europe coming together in 1914 that create these conditions for what turns into this massive, firestorm called World War One. Now, you guys are familiar with the spark that set the world on fire. So in June, I think it was June 28th, the Archduke Franz Ferdinand. This is Austria-Hungary. Austria-Hungary is an ally of Germany. Let me back up real quick. Amid all the geopolitical things I was talking about in a really, really abridged version, you have these two alliances that now have formed. You have the Central Powers, which is Germany and Prussia, Austria-Hungary, and Italy. They've aligned now in the center of Europe. And now on the outside of them is Russia aligned with France, aligned with Britain, okay? The Triple Entente, as it was called. So you have these two alliances now that are kind of locked in tension with one another. And what I tell you earlier, war plans were now based on all those lessons of the Franco-Prussian War. So they're quick acting, massive mobilization war plans. So now you have these two alliances. It's 1914. Austria-Hungary, within that one alliance with Germany, sends the heir to the throne of Austria-Hungary to Sarajevo, for a state visit. During the state visit, the Archduke is assassinated with his wife, Sophia, on the street corner in Sarajevo. I've been to the street corner. It's just a little quaint. I mean, Sarajevo is not a quaint little town, but it's not some giant metropolis. And so there it is. It's marked even to this day.
Oh, jeez.
The corner where he got shot.
That assassination was pretty interesting in itself.
Yes. And you guys definitely interrupt me, but I'm going to bring us right back on track because I want this whole thing to last for like half an hour. But yes, I really do encourage interruption. So don't let me discourage you on that. But okay, so the assassination happens by this Serbian nationalist terrorist group, really, is how we call them today, terrorist group. Serbian nationalists called the Black Hand. As far as I know, the first terrorist group that we tracked in history. Anyway, so what happens next starts the cascade of events that really quickly launch the entire world into this massive war. So Austria-Hungary, of course, the heir to the throne is just assassinated. So Austria-Hungary mobilizes their army quickly, I'm talking within days, to punish Serbia, this little upstart, cocky Slavic nation that they're gonna punish. There's always been tension between Austria-Hungary and that area of the world because the Ottoman Empire was part of it. There's a big fault line there that you can still see to this day in the middle of Sarajevo, which I think is fascinating, by the way, architecturally. Anyway, I can't digress too much. So Austria-Hungary mobilizes their army quickly to punish Serbia. Okay, fine. Serbia mobilizes to counter. Now we're talking mobilization, no shots fired yet. So this is happening within a couple of weeks. And then Russia feels compelled to come to the defense of the Serbs because there's an old historical tie to the Serbian people, the Orthodox Christian faith. Remember, that part of the world was also the intersection of Christianity, Orthodox Christianity, and Islam, right there. Right. It's like 800 years of this stuff prior to World War I. Anyway, Russia mobilizes their army. Okay, now that's the big trigger because now you've got the two alliances looking at each other going, uh-oh, we've planned for this. War's about to break out. So Russia's now mobilizing. So what happens? Germany, whose entire national survival is based on a two-front war strategy built by Alfred von Schlieffen. We're going to talk about the Schlieffen Plan, which you guys have heard of. I mean, it's a famous historical name, but now you're going to learn what it was. So Alfred von Schlieffen has put together the German war plan based on, again, the Franco-Prussian War, lessons learned with the French and the German attacks in 1870, and et cetera. So they know they're going to fight a two-front war. So that's what their plan addresses. We'll talk about the Schlieffen Plan in a minute. But the key to the Schlieffen Plan and German survival is we can't give the Russians a head start because our entire plan is predicated on knocking out France first and then moving our armies by railroad east to knock out the slower mobilizing Russians. That's the entire premise that the Schlieffen Plan is built on. So now Russia's mobilizing. So Germany says, holy crap, our entire national security is in jeopardy because we can't give them a head start. We are mobilizing. So the Kaiser, he's cautioned and he tries to back down a little bit, but he, eventually he's like, okay, we're mobilizing. So before that happens, I mean, because I don't want to make it sound like it was just autopilot, but it almost was actually. So before that happened, Germany issues a warning to Russia, stand down your army, and a warning to France that says, don't mobilize your army to try to de-escalate this thing. But that's it. Russia ignored them, and France said, we'll do what's in our national security, basically. I'm paraphrasing. So with that, the Kaiser said, okay, mobilize. Now, the funny thing to this day, and I love the pretext of this war, because it's just like, today we just scratch our heads like, how could they not see this coming? So Germany mobilizes their war plan, the Schlieffen Plan. It's all they got. They got one plan. Yeah, I know. One of the big lessons I'm writing in Battle Digest, they had one plan. Total war.
That
So
was
when
it.
the Kaiser says go, or gehen, when the Kaiser says go, it's gloves off. The entire German mobilization plan, Schlieffen plan, has started. The road to war, two-front war. That's it. That's all they got. We got one plan. I know. So Germany mobilizes on, and I'm not going to give you exact dates because it'll just distract me to look at my notes, but I'll be close. Germany mobilizes on like 2 August. They cross into Belgium, Luxembourg, and they start the big sweep. Can you pull up the map one, Marty, which is the Schlieffen plan? Okay. Now, you don't have to see all the detail on this map to really get my point here. This is actually the Schlieffen plan, not how things transpired. So let me decode this for you real quick. So you have the German armies. We're going to talk about up top. You got Kluck's First Army, von Kluck's First Army. You see that at the very top in the red box. You got Bülow's Second Army. You got Hausen's Third Army, Albrecht's Fourth Army. So this big right wing is supposed to come down. You can see the arc. You can see the arc going, off to the west. It's basically it's a giant single envelopment of France and the French army. Huh. It's going to sweep around Paris. It's going to close the back door, and it's going to push the French army essentially against the trapdoor, the anvil, whatever you want to call it, of the Fifth Army, Sixth Army, Seventh Army. You see them in red there?
Yeah.
They're going to basically stay in place and crush the French forces that are getting pushed back against them, against that wall, right? The anvil. Okay? That makes sense to you guys?
Yeah.
Can you sort of see that?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is actually good strategy. I mean, if you just look at this as a strategist, you say it's an indirect approach. It's not something the French would necessarily expect because you're not coming straight at them. You're enveloping them. You're turning their entire flank. You're pushing them against strength in the defensive positions against 5th, 6th, and 7th armies. It's a good plan. And when you're fighting two enemies, one on the west and one on the east, you need something like this to actually give yourself a fighting chance. The Schlieffen plan.
Did the Germans at that time have a mobility advantage that they could sweep that broadly and that fast?
The only mobility advantage they have was their internal mobility. Their railroads were better than Belgium railroads and French railroads. But once you're off the German railroads, you start to struggle with your own mobility problems. But remember, this isn't the age of armor. This is still infantrymen in trucks.
Still foot against foot.
Yeah, and foot and horses. Lots of horses. This is still the age of horse, believe it or not. I mean, it died off really quickly, literally, in these battlefields. But we're still talking horse-drawn stuff, rudimentary trucks carrying troops, but armies on foot, still moving on foot. Okay, so it's a feasible plan. And again, you're stuck between Russia and France.
Yeah, you got to do something.
You've got to fight them both.
Yeah.
So von Schlieffen actually came up with probably the best plan he could have under the situation. Now, the interesting thing about this plan is most historians say it might have actually worked if the chief of staff of the German army, which is, his name is Moltke, von Moltke. You've probably heard the term Moltke, because Moltke was also famous for, Moltke the Elder was also a great Prussian strategist and wrote lots of stuff and was a great general. This is his nephew, Moltke, the chief of the German staff for the war, because Schlieffen was too old, basically retired, a couple of years before World War I started. So Moltke, we'll talk about him more. He's the implementer of the plan for the Kaiser. Okay. Moltke made some changes to the plan that actually affected its execution. Part of the Schlieffen plan was, you see those blue arrows down at the bottom where the French right wing is pushing into Germany? Moltke designed the plan so that the German army would give ground purposefully to let the French take ground and take attrition, but also very importantly to not be able to reinforce their left flank because the forces were engaged and driving into Germany. Moltke, unfortunately for the Germans, changed that. He reinforced the German left flank, which is to the right of your screen, and he took forces away from the big right hammer, the big right wheel. That adversely affected the plan. And then as the fighting started, the Russians actually attacked out east, and Moltke took some more forces from the right wing and moved them off to the eastern front. Too late to do any good against the Russians, but it weakened the right flank. So he actually made a couple of critical errors prior to the shots being fired. Okay, so back to the action on the ground. So in the first few weeks of the war, the Germans are moving through Belgium. The Belgian army is too small to resist, really. There are 6 divisions total of 100,000 men total. So they really do put up some brave resistance, and they have a couple of key fort complexes that really force the Germans to expend some time in reducing the forts with heavy artillery and all that stuff. So the Belgians play their part, and they play it well, and they end up escaping and withdrawing back to Antwerp. So they're a constant threat on Moltke's rear as he drives forward, which is also positive for the Allies. But the big right wheel is in motion, and it's massive, and it's difficult to stop. The Belgians aren't stopping it. They delay it by a couple of days. You want to put the map back up? You just
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, I want to look at the map just for a minute, just because I'm telling the story. Even though this is the plan, it followed the plan a little bit until I'll tell you what the deviations were. And I don't have time to give you all the detail, which you probably don't want anyway. Anyway, so the right wheel is moving. Okay, so Kluck's first army is driving west, starting a turn, south, southwest. Bülow's army's driving into Belgium, and they're making great gains. They're unstoppable. Now they get in trouble. Meanwhile, the interesting thing is, during the first weeks of the conflict, the French general in charge, General Joseph Joffre, you've probably heard that name because he was the hero of France after this battle, but he really screwed up a lot in the beginning. He redeemed himself at the end, and he deserves credit for that, but he really screwed up in the beginning. He was in charge of the entire military of France, and France had a war plan too. Funny thing, right? And it was called Plan 17. Unlike the German plan, the Schlieffen plan, which is a nice strategic indirect approach envelopment, Joffre's Plan 17 was the frontal assault, not very creative and, just really not really creative. And it just drove into German strength, and the Germans only gave ground because it was part of their strategy. And they took heavy tolls as you can see on the map, because it actually played out this way. Third Army and Second Army and First Army of the French side, the blue boxes, made their advances into Alsace and Lorraine and the Ardennes forest area to reclaim that territory. So Joffre is fixated on Plan 17 in the first few weeks of the war, while the Germans are doing their right sweep through Belgium and entering, the northern part of France. And Joffre is almost ignoring the German right wing to focus on his war plan, driving into those lost territories and driving into Germany, which, he's kind of thick-headed at this point. You got to be honest with yourself. A student of history would say, okay, you kind of missed the signs here. He's really fixated. We're really fixated on the plan here, there, General. But so be it. It happened. Now, finally, you see the French Fifth Army there in the middle, the blue box. It says Lanrizac. So Lanrizac is Joffre's northernmost commander as he's executing his plan in these first weeks of August of 1914. And Lanzarek is getting nervous because he's hearing the reports from Belgium about the resistance at the forts and the brave small Belgian army resistance, holding off the Germans coming in and all that stuff. Because he's the furthest left of the French line. So think about it. Look at those red arrows, and look at the furthest left of the French line. I mean, this German plan is set up to work quite well, actually.
Right.
So anyway, as the fighting continues, Joffrey can't ignore it anymore. There's too much going on in the north. Lanzarek finally gets permission to do reconnaissance, moves up to his, what we're going to say is the left, north and left, or north and west. Now, Marty, if you throw up the other slide that I gave you, slide 2, you'll kind of see where things start to make contact. Yeah. Okay. So once the French react, once Joffrey realizes, okay, now I know where the Germans are actually doing their main effort. It's up north. Hello. I better change my alignment here and my force distribution. So as he's failing on the right, and some of it was the Germans allowing him to succeed and then pushing him back to their original positions. Fortunately, the Germans, and this is one of the flaws of the Schlieffen Plan too, because Moltke reinforced that German left flank, on the right of your screen, the German left flank, and it let the Germans push the French back to fortified defensive positions. So now they can hold off the Germans and reallocate forces to their left wing. I mean, it's classic. Moltke thinks he's supporting the German effort. He's helping the French in this case. Yep. Now they can reinforce their left flank, which they did. So now Joffrey turns around his thinking, and this is where he deserves credit. He issues a new plan, reorganizes the entire military, takes forces from the east, from his east flank, from his right wing, and to his left wing, creates a brand new army. You see the 6th Army there above Paris? Creates a brand new 6th Army from other forces off his right wing. And he's making all these shifts as the Germans are pushing. You can see where Kluck is, Bülow is, Hassam is. They're pushing. And the British Expeditionary Force has arrived, because that was a pre-combat alliance commitment from Britain. They've arrived, and they come up and they hit the Germans unexpectedly at Mons, which I'm not going to bore you with all the points on the map. I'm trying to paint the contours of why this battle is interesting. And so the British arrive. They don't fall into the right flank as planned, because there is no right flank. It's being formed as the Germans are pushing. They sort of meet up with 5th Army. You're going to see in the slide, look at 5th Army on this slide. It's got a new commander, D'Esprit, because Joffrey replaced his army commander for being like too cautious and stuff. It's typical. Joffrey relieved like 40 generals during the first weeks of this. He's just one of those old
Navy
school.
Style.
Yeah, he's one of those old school idealists. It's like, we will win with offensive spirit. That kind of guy. Yeah. It's like, hey man, we're facing machine guns now. This is different kind of warfare, and so
no doubt.
Yeah, it's not a cavalry charge anymore.
Yeah, exactly. So, Joffrey is learning here, and that's why I think he does redeem himself. Is he's created 6th Army now. They're forming by Paris. There's a new commander that's in charge of the Paris, not Mannery. He's in charge of 6th Army. But there's a general called Galliani, who's like the savior of this battle. So I'm going to talk about Galliani in a minute. But so Galliani is the military governor of Paris. So he's in charge of defending Paris. 5th Army is now with a new commander. You see the BEF now, they're under French. It's confusing because they're in France, but it's Sir John French, of course, just to make it confusing for us people that like maps. It looks like a French army, but it's commanded by French, the BEF. So the Germans have now pushed back these flank forces that Joffrey has reorganized and basically sent to the front. The Germans have pushed them back, and they pushed them back so effectively that Bülow, this is one of the critical errors leading up to this battle. And the funny thing, by the way, about the Battle of the Marne is it wasn't a really climactic battle of like force on force. It was a battle of psychology and positioning where the Germans lost their nerve because they were out of position, and the French and the Allies took advantage of it at the perfect time to turn the Germans around and make them retreat, which is the amazing part of the Battle of the Marne. So we're getting to that real close now. And then you guys please bring some questions up, because I am just kind of hitting the high points. So now you can see Kluck and Bülow are pushing the Allies back. They're pushing the French armies back. They've already pushed the BEF back. So these two German commanders are thinking, yes, my lines of communication are strained. My soldiers are hungry. My soldiers are tired. I am having trouble communicating with Moltke back in the rear. Things are getting blurry. But you know what? We're kicking butt.
Yeah,
We're kicking butt.
Yeah.
I mean, the French and the British seem to be sort of defeated. So we're going to keep moving forward. Bülow is confident enough that he asks Kluck, which unfortunately, I guess in hindsight for the Germans, Moltke gave Bülow operational control of Kluck's army at this point, mainly just to save the alignment, on the big wheel. You guys ever been in a parade and you're trying to do the wheel move?
Yeah.
It's pretty hard just in a formation of like 12 people. So think about armies online trying to create a wheel. So anyway, Bülow had Kluck under his operational control. He turns Kluck eastward. Really a change to the entire Schlieffen plan. He turns Kluck eastward because he wants to do the finishing blow, basically to Fifth Army, as they're up north, where the dots are previously, not where Fifth Army ends up.
Yeah.
I can't do, 10 slides. So Kluck turns inwards. Moltke actually approves it because he's got a little fog of war going on too. He's far back. He's in Luxembourg. His headquarters in Luxembourg. He's not quite seeing things. And communications are not good. They're using radios for like the first time in warfare, but they're not as reliable. Line of sight. You guys know there's retrans stuff going on, and it's not easy. Anyway, so Kluck turns inwards. So now, if you think back to the original picture, Kluck's supposed to go all the way around west, way sweeping around Paris. Now, Kluck's forces are tired, hungry, suffering from logistical strain, and communications not so good. But he thinks he can help Bülow create the finishing blow to Fifth Army. So they do. They fight Fifth Army. Fifth Army withdraws. The BF withdraws. And again, they think they got him on the run. They think they got him beat. And Kluck does something on his own now because Moltke recognizes the problem that he's created with this operational control issue. So he detaches Kluck from Bülow's operational control, tells him to move back out to the west, take your original track. We're going to get this thing back on track. And Kluck makes a decision at the next battle. They re-engage the Fifth Army as the Fifth Army's fallen back. They re-engage at the Sambre River. And I don't have a slide on this, but it's happening basically where that middle blue line is to the right, upper right, above Paris. So they engage there, and Bülow asks Kluck to come in on his flank so he can finish off Fifth Army. Kluck voluntarily this time says, okay, I'm turning it. Now, this is the critical point of the Battle of the Marne, actually. Kluck voluntarily turns in to support Bülow's attack to, finish off Fifth Army and kind of roll up the entire French flank. But Galliani, remember I mentioned him?
Yeah.
Galliani sees that, and this is another first in warfare, really. The British have an old-fashioned biplane up in the air. They do air reconnaissance. They see Kluck's army turning southeast in front of Paris. And Galliani actually says, we can hit them in the flank. We can actually take this new Sixth Army and hit the Germans in the flank, and it will be decisive. And Galliani has to convince Joffre of the plan. And once Joffre's convinced, he has to convince the BEF commander, French, and they do. And then it's all hands on deck. They orient, and as the Germans are now reorganizing to sort of revitalize the Schlieffen plan and get Kluck back out there on the western flank, they run into Sixth Army. And Sixth Army hits them in the flank. And because Sixth Army hits Kluck in the flank, Kluck is forced, because Sixth Army is strong enough now. Kluck doesn't have a full picture of how big Sixth Army is building in Paris. So Sixth Army is big. So Kluck is feeding reinforcements, and now you'll see Kluck has to reinforce with forces from his what is his left flank, on his east. So he's taking forces, putting them, where that blue line is by Paris. He's trying to reinforce that direction. And meantime, Fifth Army and Ninth Army attack north because Joffrey put together the counterattack plan. And when those two units go and the BEF goes, the Ninth Army totally keeps Bülow in check and hits him. So Bülow's forced to consolidate on his front. And now this gap has opened up between First and Second Army. Perfect timing. Each one is now focused on an enemy to their, to the opposite direction and south. And so it's creating this gap in the German line. And the BEF and Fifth Army move towards that gap. This is all happening now between the 5th and the 9th of September. And they move up to the Marne River. And the Germans are nervous enough now, not the frontline commanders as much, because they're still confident. And tactically, they're actually still doing a fine job against the French. They're kind of holding them back and all that stuff. But Moltke back in his headquarters is like having a mental breakdown. Like, oh my God, there's a giant gap in the entire right wing. And the BEF and Fifth Army are now moving into this gap. It's a huge emotional breakthrough for Moltke going, we're doomed. Our plan is ruined. And that's all it took for the Germans to withdraw. And they withdraw to the Aisne River. And that sets the entire battle lines, trench warfare for the next 4 years.
Wow.
It all happens because the French stop the Germans, because the Germans allow this gap to open up, and Galliani is smart enough to see it, and Joffrey is smart enough to reorient the entire French plan quickly to capitalize on that gap. And at the key moment, the German commander, Moltke, loses his nerve because of his separated armies, and he halts, and they retreat to that river. The French regroup. They don't exploit that success like they should have, but then again, the Germans did a very well-organized retreat. But anyway, that set everything for the entire war. And then we were stuck in these trenches, basically at that river for the rest of the war. Now, the weeks following, they did what's called the race to the sea. They tried to outflank each other, moving north. But basically, it was set.
Yeah.
So that's why the battle is so important. It stopped the Germans from winning World War I, essentially, and created this whole static front for the next 4.5 years.
Wow.
Yeah. Okay. What kind of discussion you want to get into?
Sir, do you want that third? We had that third map up, the Battle of the Marne map.
Oh yeah, give me the Battle of the Marne. I should have showed that. I should have played that.
But I see.
That's the gap.
Kind of developed.
That would have been better. Sorry, Marty. You're right. So you could see the BEF and the Fifth Army; those blue arrows go into that gap, and Moltke's armies are separated. There is definitely a gap there now, and they're worried. And that's all it took. Lost his nerve, and battle was over. They retreated to that. You could see the Aisne River up there. It's 10 miles or 20, maybe 30 miles north. But they retreat to that, and that forms their line for the rest of the war, basically.
I had no idea of the early part of World War One. All you think is, you got the assassination, and then you got trenches, and that's all you kind of know, right?
Yeah.
And then, but this is fascinating how they got there.
I got to tell you, what stands out to me, even through this battle, World War I and into World War II, it appears, correct me if I'm wrong, that the German commanders were better at planning. There were a number of things that the German could have done in this battle and actually pushed the French out, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I think their commander and leadership was much better prepared for this little, even though the Stefan plan was the only one they had, I believe their commanders were better prepared.
Yeah, I think you can make the case. Now, remember, historically, we really do give credit to the Prussians and the Germans for developing the whole idea of the general staff. They were the first
Oh,
ones that
yeah.
really developed a general staff nationally to manage and equip and train and resource a military and plan operations. So yes, they were good at it. The Schlieffen plan, like I said in the beginning, was actually a good plan based on trying to optimize where you are in the world and what you're dealing with. So yes, I totally agree with you. Joffrey's plan was not creative. It was Plan 17 was very uncreative. The Russians, same kind of thing. They didn't really have much of a plan except go
Force. Yeah.
mobilize and go attack. This is creative. Yeah.
Well, it's interesting too. You don't normally see within the course of one battle, Joffrey making, kind of the tactical error at the beginning, but able to capitalize on the Germans' openings and weaknesses later. So you don't usually see that he did bad first, good later.
Yes, I
can't imagine the change in mentality and the logistics involved in creating a whole shift and moving that into a whole organized army as in the 6th.
Yeah.
And then the coordination between them and Paris, all while German forces are pushing through Belgium.
It's a great point, Jake. That's impressive. That was a massive undertaking. And they couldn't have done it without railroads. I mean, railroads enabled the whole thing to happen.
But that gamble from him, I mean, yes, okay. Looking at it now, it didn't look like a gamble. Looking at it back then, limited intel, limited surveillance, real time. He's like, okay, can we hold Germany at their southwestern border? Fuck it, let's move a whole group up to Paris.
Right.
Yeah,
let's go, guys.
It's a great point. That's why I give Joffrey a lot of credit, because he did screw up in the beginning. There's no question about it. But he did correct it, and corrected decisively enough time to make this thing happen.
The German logistics on that outside loop, those are always going to be a difficult one, right? Like that 5th Army area, that keeping them informed and keeping them in supplies all the way through Belgium is going to be a key point.
I don't want to sell this out, but did the Germans kind of just march right through the Belgian army? I mean, I know they held them up a little bit.
Well, they did. I mean, they marched right through the Belgian army, but the Belgians did good at the forts. There was a special brigade attached to these fort complexes they had built, and they did man the forts and defend the forts admirably. And more importantly, they really did a lot of disruptive activities in the rear. Sabotage and snipers and ambushes. And I mean, they were these German supply lines were down to a trickle because they were going through Belgium, hostile country.
They're good at the guerrilla warfare, man. World War II, they were great at it. Honestly.
Yeah.
That resistance in that area is awesome.
Yeah, they did their part. And, at the time they were very lauded in the press as being brave. For a small army, they did a lot. But I think Jake's point is a good one. A lot of critics of the Schlieffen plan, despite the changes that Moltke made that doomed it to failure, it would have struggled anyway because of logistics. You pinch off those arteries and you try to supply those forces moving on such wide arcs, you're going to have problems.
Yeah.
Like the easiest line would have been straight across the front to get to the other.
Right.
But then you totally, to avoid all that other stuff going on, you would have to arc it over. Right. And that's just extra time, extra vulnerability, everything,
Yep.
Was Moltke's replacement, what's his name, Falkenhayn?
Yes, Falkenhayn. Yep.
He prepared the counter plan, and I think that was a pretty good job as well. Once again, I'm talking about a German commander doing a good job.
Right.
Where he understood and expected, based on what he was looking at, created a great counter.
Yeah. You're talking about after the lines had settled into
after they settled. Yep.
Yeah, Falkenhayn, I mean, did as good a job probably as anyone could have done. I can't I can't argue with you. Yeah.
Because that was back. I mean, that was already down in September, I believe, when he replaced Mulkey. Yeah, I think he did a great job with the counter plan.
Yeah, what these commanders didn't appreciate yet is because they hadn't lived it yet, like any warfare, it evolves, and they hadn't lived it yet, is these lines were going to be static. They didn't have enough counterpunch to go through and sustain movement, maneuver through the counterpunch. Even if you get through the lines, it was impossible.
Yeah.
You couldn't mass enough troops to do it. So they were really stuck in a new kind of warfare that they just had to grope through for 4 years, unfortunately, and it was so costly. It's a shame.
Well, even with this battle being in September, I mean, you got a couple months, and now you're into the winter months.
Yeah.
Which limits your mobility anyway. So
Right.
Huh. Fascinating. I never knew that. About
Once you're dug in, once you're dug in with machine guns and artillery, and there's no tanks and jet fighters to help you out, you're really screwed. It's a defensive war, it's a static war, and you can't break through those things.
Yeah, neither side could.
Yeah.
So, What do you think the biggest lesson is to take away from this battle, sir?
Well, on a strategic side, it's military planning has to give your leadership options. I mean, I shouldn't laugh. So many millions of people died, but it's like Germany had one war plan. It was like,
yeah, that's
okay,
crazy.
Okay,
that's
the
right.
Russians are mobilized. We're going to war, and we're going to attack France. I mean, it was crazy, actually, if you look back at it. But I mean, at the time, I understand it made sense.
Well,
that's a big lesson, though. Strategic planners create flexible plans. Yeah.
So I imagine over this, there's like aha moments, right? Because you mentioned a couple first. One of them saying that there was a plane that went over and saw where some of the troops were flanking.
Yep.
So were those like after that aha moments are like, okay, you know what? Now we know this, and we could use this capability, this domain, to basically see what they're doing, and how fast they catch on to that to
they
start
caught
using
on
that tactic.
quickly. Yeah, like air reconnaissance with the the early World War One biplane. Picture those Red Baron type planes. Biplane, triplane. They were vulnerable, but easy, good platform for reconnaissance. So that took off.
Right.
Literally took off quickly. Radios, like I mentioned, radios were used really in the first large-scale warfare in this conflict, and of course, they worked and they stuck with us to this day. But yeah, those were good lessons. But I think the strategic lesson I talked about, flexibility, is an important one. I think there's always leadership lessons. You guys have even commented on Joffrey, especially Jake's comment. He really did adapt, and it was an amazing adaptation in a relatively short period of time. So he does deserve a lot of credit. Mulkey, leadership questions about Mulkey and messing with the plan without seeing the implications of messing with the plan. He weakened it from the beginning. And then, there's normal lessons of fog of war. Fog of war is a big one here. Clausewitz warned us all about that, and we've all seen it. But boy, did it play a big part in the Battle of the Marne, because Moltke, back in his headquarters, way back in Belgium, Luxembourg, he just couldn't keep a really clear picture of what was going on in the front. And that haunted him. So, C2, location of your command, that stuff matters. So there's a lot of lessons in here.
I don't know about you guys. But I look at this map and I see those big sweeping arrows, and I look at this battle was 5 days.
Yeah, this was 5 days. Now, the entire campaign was,
sure.
2 August
Right.
and went to 9 September. So,
but still, can you imagine starting in Germany, walking that outside ring all the way to northern Belgium and down in 5 days?
Yeah.
My God.
And we bitch about walking from the portals to the building.
Right. Oh, I mean, when they were pushing the French back.
Wow.
When they had made first contact with the French on the 20th of August, they were pushing the French back and the British back at like 25 miles a day.
Wow,
Combat,
that's crazy.
hitting and pushing 25 miles a day. So yeah, heavy lifting here.
Yeah, he took those troops out from the French right front, and pushed them back to Paris. It's like, hey, I need you to go from Denver, and I need you to go over to Kansas City. All right, in the next couple of days. Can you guys do that? And
That's
like,
right.
I guess so.
That's right. Yep.
Jeez, that's amazing. That's amazing.
Yeah, and I don't know what would happen if Galliani didn't see.
That's amazing too.
Yeah, Kluk's turn to the southeast in front of Paris was critical. So he saw it, and he was smart enough to actually push Joffrey into accepting his plan. And that was critical. There's always that guy in every campaign, every battle, that's not necessarily the main character that kind of makes the entire thing work. Galliani was actually that guy in the Battle of Marne.
Fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah, that's great. You guys good? Any more questions? Thank you, sir. That was
My
that was
pleasure.
amazing.
Yeah.
My pleasure. Thank you.